So welcome to chapter 13 today, 2nd Samuel. Okay, so we are going to the book of 2nd Samuel. So this is mainly the story of King David. So King David, just remember he was a nobody, then he became a king, and a happy king because he became king. And then unfortunately he committed adultery with Bathsheba, which we went through last week. So no more happy, become a sad king. And especially because God said that because of his sin, there will be consequences. The son from the adultery died, but not just that, there'll be trouble from within the family and so on. So now we are going to look at what happens after he has committed adultery with Bathsheba. So we come to chapter 13. Has foretold, trouble for David arises from within his household. So previously, he's been fighting with the Philistines and the Ammonites and all the nations around Israel, bringing peace to Israel. But because of his sin, his household is going to lose the peace. And now his problems are not outside, but within his household. His son Amnon falls in David with Tamar, who is his half sister. Remember, David has got a few wives. So Amnon is a son from one wife, and then Tamar is a daughter from another wife. Okay, so they are half brother, half sister. So this Amnon, he cannot get her, cannot marry her, and so on, because it's illegal to marry one's sister. In Genesis, at the beginning, incest is not a sin. But after Exodus, when God gives the 10 Commandments and other laws, part of the law is no more incest. Okay, you're not allowed to marry your sister, your brother, father cannot marry children, and a lot of these relational forbiddance when it comes to marriage. Now, Amnon's cousin gives him a wicked plan. Amnon pretends to be sick, and he asks Tamar to cook for him. Okay, so this is the plan. So the cousin tells Amnon, pretend that you're sick, ask your sister, your stepsister, to cook something for you. And so King David tells his daughter Tamar to go and cook food for Amnon because he requests for it. And while she's serving him, the stepbrother rapes the stepsister. Okay, and after he rapes her, suddenly he hates her more than he loved her. That's what the Bible says. That he hated her more than he loved her. She's kicked out and she goes away weeping. Okay, so the question is, why do you think Amnon had this sudden hatred for his sister? In the beginning, he's like in love with his sister, but now suddenly he's hating her. What do you all think is the reason? Unmute and talk.
I think he feels guilt. So every time you look at her, he remembers what he did.
So one reason is because now he suddenly feels guilt over what he has done. Okay, yeah, good. So it shows that Amnon did not really love Tamar. It
Yeah.
was just lust. If he had really loved her, he would have respected her and he would have protected her, right? So this just shows
Yeah.
that it's not true love, right?
Yeah.
Now, Amnon did not did know deep within that he had sinned because he
Mm.
forced himself on his stepsister. Not only did he force, which is rape, but his own
Mm.
sister. So it's not just rape, but it's also incest. Now, probably after satisfying his lust, he's gripped by his sin, and that causes him to feel guilty. Whenever you sin, you will feel guilty, right? So
Mm.
he's now feeling guilty. Now, Amnon deflected his guilt onto Tamar in the form of anger. Okay, so he
Mm.
feels guilty, but instead of dealing with it, he now deflects it onto Tamar as if she has done something wrong. And it is quite common for people who are guilty to point fingers at others, not just rape or whatever. Generally speaking, when somebody does something wrong, one of the ways we cope with it is we point finger at this. Hey, you know. So very common in traffic accident, right? So the one who is in the wrong will come out and quickly blame the other one. Oh, why did you cut in? Why did you? When they may be actually in the wrong. Okay, so it's quite common for people not to admit that they are guilty, but rather to try and blame other people. Okay. Now, Tamar's brother from the same mother, Absalom, comforts and counsels Tamar not to be rushed in this matter because it is something within the family. So he says, don't make a big issue of it. And so Tamar stays in Absalom's house, a desolate woman. So basically her life is ruined by what the brother has done. Uh, it's ruined because the hurt and the pain will be there. And to think your own brother did it, and then the end you are kind of staying in the same palace and so on, and there'll be family occasions, other occasions where they have to see each other. The hurt and the pain is more than if it was done by some stranger. So anyway, so she stays in Absalom's house. Okay, and so we need to realize that when we sin, there are consequences, and it's not just you who's hurt, but people around you who are hurt. And so David's sin, here the sin is, I'm not talking about Amnon's rape sin, but David's sin has consequences. It brought trouble in the family, just as God said. Okay. Now, King David hears of what Amnon did and is furious. David continues to fail as a father in not rebuking and correcting his son. Why doesn't he rebuke his son? Why doesn't he correct his son? Absalom does not bring up this matter, but harbors hatred toward Amnon. So the father is angry with the son, and the brother is also angry, not just angry, filled with hatred, but everybody pretend that nothing happened. 2 years later, Absalom invites the king and his sons to a meal. Okay, so Absalom 2 years later, when things seem to be forgotten and all, says, I'm throwing a party. He asked King David to come, asked all the other sons to come, his brothers. King David says, no, I can't, I'm busy and all that. Then Absalom says, okay, if you can't come, let the other sons come, and including Amnon. And David says, why he come? And then in the end, he says, okay. So all the sons of the king go for this meal, and Absalom arranges for Amnon to be killed. So Amnon tells his soldiers when the brother Absalom tells his soldiers, when his brother Amnon is drunk, I'll give the signal and you'll kill him. And so that's what happens. And news of Amnon's death reaches David, and Absalom flees from David to his maternal grandfather. Okay, how do I know his maternal grandfather? You have to read Chronicles. Okay, so remember when you read the Kings and Samuel and Kings, you have to read Chronicles at the same time to get a bit more information. So he flees to his maternal grandfather and stays there for 3 years. Okay, he's afraid his father might take revenge, whatever. Now, David longs for his son, Absalom, every day. He probably understood and accepted Absalom's revenge. Okay, that is the last line is my own statement, not in scripture. So the fact that David longs for his son and so on, probably he understood that, the brother is angry because his sister was raped and so on. So he understood and accepted Absalom's revenge. Okay, that's my understanding. Now, one question I like to ask is, God tells David, now that you have sinned against Bathsheba and you killed Uriah, so I'm going to bring troubles into your own household. So did God predict these events? Or did God predestine these events to fulfill his prophecy? Which is it? What do you think? Unmute and answer. No thoughts? God says, I'll bring trouble, right? And the troubles happen, right? So is this God predestined for all these troubles? God made it such that Amnon will rape his stepsister. Prediction or predestined? Okay, if no wants to try, God is no author of evil, right? Bible says God cannot be tempted, neither does he tempt anyone. So God is no author of evil. He doesn't produce evil or does evil, and he doesn't make anyone do evil. So he does not predestine these evils. Okay, there are Christians from the election group, those who believe in election and predestination, the hyper predestination group, they will say everything is sovereign. God's sovereignty is the most important thing, and therefore God controls everything. And then if you push them, say if God controls everything, then how about evil? Is evil free, or God has to predestine? So those hyper Calvinists will say, yeah, even evil is from God, because God must be ultimately in control of all things. So evil also is from God. Okay, that is totally not biblical, and I wouldn't want to serve a God who is predestining evil and then punishing us for doing evil. Okay, anyway, so the first point is God does not predestine evil. Second thing, God can protect and prevent all evils from happening. So if God wanted to protect Tamar from this rape scene, incest, he could have done it. Okay, so there's no question that God is sovereign. God allows natural events to take place, though he does intervene. So normal course of events, God allows things to happen naturally. Everybody's given freedom. You can make free choices, and then the consequences. So normally natural events take place, though God does intervene. Okay, so sometimes God comes and puts his hand and make changes. Okay, sometime in answer to prayer, sometime because it's his sovereign will, this thing cannot take place or whatever. Okay, now if David had not sinned, had not sinned, God wanted to bless David and all that, right? So God may have intervened to prevent evil. Okay, so if David didn't sin with Bathsheba and kill Uriah, probably God will want to bless David and David's household. So probably this sin of rape and incest would have been prevented. I'm just speculating. But since David sinned, God did not intervene to prevent these evils. Okay, God could have intervened, but because David sinned, God did not intervene. There's a difference between God did not intervene to prevent evil and God predestined evil. So I'm not saying God predestined this evil. I'm saying God did not intervene to prevent these evils. Two different things. Okay, God in his wisdom does allow evil so that his light can shine in darkness. God works with all things, not just the good things, but even bad things. Okay, so God allows good things to happen. God allows evil things to happen. Again, God allow evil is not God creates evil or God uh, predestined evil. Okay, he doesn't prevent evil, and he also allows evil. That doesn't make him the author of evil. Okay, that's very important to understand. Any questions, any things you want to clarify before we move on? This is important Because if something happens to you, you cannot blame God for evil that happens in your life. Okay. But you can say, well, God didn't prevent this bad thing from happening
Mhm.
and so on. Okay. And God can even allow bad things to happen, even in our Christian life. But He is
Mm.
not one who allows evil. Evil and bad thing is two different. Evil is moral evil. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. If you are fine, we move on.
Pastor,
Yes.
yeah. In chapter 12, verse 11, it says, "Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up evil against you out of your own house."
Yep.
So that means he's allowing,
Okay. First thing,
raise up.
evil. There's moral evil, and the other one,
Mhm.
evil as in bad things. There are two. When you talk about
Okay.
evil, there are two,
Okay.
right? So
All
God
right.
is allowing bad things to happen. Evil is as in bad
All right.
things to happen. Okay, not
Okay.
moral evil. Okay, but
Okay. Okay.
in
All
this
right.
particular case, incest and rape is moral evil. It's moral evil.
Okay.
So God
Okay.
is not the author of moral evil. Okay.
Mhm.
So God does
Mm.
one, or not say God does one. God allows, and God actually raises bad things in to happen in David's life, but not
Okay.
by being the author of moral evil. Okay, He
Okay.
allows bad things to happen, even though He wanted to bless David, but because of his sin consequences.
Mm. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so sin has consequences. Earlier we said trouble in the family. Now it's death in the family. Okay. So if you look at the people in David's household, so Amnon, he's blessed to be born as David's son, yet was ruined by sinful lust for his stepsister. Lack of self-control destroys life. So that's something we can learn from Amnon. He's David's son, he's blessed to be David's son and all that, but he cannot say, oh, because my father sinned, therefore I am sinning. Okay. You cannot do all that. It is his own lack of self-control. He realizes he likes his sister. Okay. More than like lah. He lusts after his sister. But he should have controlled. He should have said, this is wrong. This is a sinful desire. I shouldn't have this and so on. Okay, so the lack of self-control destroys people, and we must be careful because we can like something or lust after something, money, fame, fortune, whatever. And if we don't control it, it will control us and it will destroy us. So we need to examine our life, even as Christians and so on. Are there things that we so-called like, but it's actually lust, and those things that are not pleasing to God, it will destroy us. Now, Jonadab, who is a friend of Amnon as well as his cousin, he's not such a good guy. He's described as very shrewd man, and he's the one who gave the idea to Amnon. Why don't you pretend to be sick and then ask your sister to cook for you and so on. Well, he should have dissuaded and rebuked Amnon for longing after his own stepsister, and they are related. So if he's a cousin of Amnon, then Tamar is also related to him. So he is actually telling his own cousin to do something back to another cousin. So it's not just a friend, but he's part of the family. It's all messed up. So Tamar is obedient to her father and naive with her stepsister. When Amnon tells her to sleep with him, she pleads and tells him that it is an evil deed. She tries to evade but fails because she's weaker than the brother is stronger. Right? So innocent victim, though a king's daughter. She's a king's daughter, but unfortunately for her. Now Absalom, he's very cunning and he's very patient, right? He didn't react and try to take revenge on the spot and all. He pretend that no big deal, he doesn't know or whatever. So not reacting to such a shameful misdeed done to his sister, Absalom waits for things to cool down and takes revenge 2 years later. See how patient is he, how cunning he is. So he waits for 2 years before he takes revenge. So when we talk about Amnon, was he in love? Is this love? Is this love? Can you fall in love with your own sister or brother? Fall in love, not just like. Can you fall in love with your own sister or brother? Actually can. I'm not saying legally can. I mean feeling wise you can. Fathers can even have lustful desires for their own daughters. And likewise, mothers can have lustful desire for their sons and so on. We may not like all this, but it happens in this world, okay? So unfortunately. So it is possible to have lustful desires for your own children, for your own siblings, or your cousin or whatever. Huh? Just because you have lust doesn't mean you must give in to that lust. So we don't just practice a love by feelings. Oh, I like her, so I must have her, that kind of nonsense. Love does not compel, right? Love is very gracious and it looks after the other, not self. So what is true love? True love must be grounded in truth and righteousness and is about the other, not about self. So do we practice true love of God? And in today's world, there's promotion of love. Love is the most important thing. Love was, and so there's in the past, in the 1960s, the hippie movement, they promoted open love. Hey man, peace, hang loose, man, love. Everybody love one another and all that. So it can be premarital sex, it can be adultery, whatever. Don't care as long as you love the person and you don't hurt another person. Consensual sex. You agree, I agree, consensual, then that's fine, and so on. Okay, and recently, for the past few years, the issue of homosexual love. So what's wrong with a man love a man, a woman love a woman? It's love, what? And God is love, what? And so on, right? So just because it is love, there's promotion of all kinds of love. And of course, there's also love of bestiality, love of beast of love of animals. When I say love of animal, I mean having sex with animal. And in the US, there are some people who are trying to promote pedophile love for children. Okay, they want it to become legal. They don't call it pedophile. They call it what is that? Homosexual same-sex love. Pedophile, they call it something like young people attraction or something like that. Okay, so they want to do evil, they just change the names and so on, make it sound nicer, and then they say, oh, it's okay because it's a form of love and so on. So we as Christians must be careful that we don't say love is the most important thing. It's a particular kind of love, godly love that we promote, not just love full stop. Okay. So in the West, they were all Christians at one point. They learned about the importance of love, but then they threw away the God who is love. They threw away God, and then they just want to keep love. So it's not godly love. It's just human love, lustful love. And so that is very sad. Now, David, like Eli and Samuel, who were godly but failed to discipline their sons. So David is just like them. David too fails in his fathering role. Now, why do you think David failed in his fathering role? He's someone who is blessed by God and he's the king. Therefore, he will pass judgment right and wrong and all that stuff. And so why did he fail when it comes to his children? What do you think? Any reasons? Unmute and talk. A man after God's heart, but fails to discipline his sons. Why?
Too busy.
Busy. Well, he's busy, not busy enough to commit adultery, not busy enough to plan murder. He's not that busy. His generals are fighting. He's just in the palace, walking around.
But earlier on, I think he was also fighting.
In the when
Earlier, yes,
Saul's
earlier,
Saul's time, when
yes,
he
yeah.
became king, his commanders fight. I mean, normally kings don't fight lah.
Mm.
In the context of the story, okay, what we have studied, he's committed adultery, murder, everything, judgment comes. Why do you think he fails to discipline his sons? I mean, if your son has committed rape, wow, you will be furious, right? Or in worst case, not just rape, but rape and incest against his own sister or stepsister. But how come he doesn't do anything?
Oh, because maybe he feel that he didn't set a good example, is it? So
Yeah,
that if he try to discipline the sons, he may say, "Hey, what about you?"
yeah. Who are you to discipline me? Your life already messed up. In fact, it
Yeah.
is because of you we get the judgment from God and so on, right? So maybe a bit of problem. Oh yeah, Hui Hun was saying pedophile, they changed it to minor attracted people. Okay, so attraction to minor. So that is changing him. Okay, so unlike others, David had no moral grounds since he himself has committed adultery. Okay, David knew from Nathan that God had proclaimed judgment within his household. From now, whatever happens, David must accept it all as part of God's judgment. So this is the predicament of David. One, he has no moral grounds, no moral authority to tell any of his children, especially when it comes to sex, because he has failed. Secondly, how does he know that this thing is not part of the punishment? God says, I'll bring trouble to your family. So this is the trouble. So he has no moral grounds and he stands under judgment himself. How is he going to judge anyone else? So it's important to be righteous, to have moral authority over your children. It's important. And for those people who are the young people here, the young adults, I want to tell you that you must have sexual purity in your life. Now, if you have premarital sex and so on, next time if you want to rebuke your children or tell them premarital sex is wrong, you will feel a sense of guilt and you won't be able to say it as forcefully. So don't wait until your parents and so on. So think about moral righteousness, the need to be moral and pure and so on. And don't follow the way of the world. Sex is just a physical thing, no big deal and so on. When you have children, you need that authority, the moral authority to say, mommy, daddy, we were pure, right? So think about that. Knowing that David is longing for his son, chapter 14, Joab arranges for a woman to plead her case before David. He arranges arranges for a lady to come and pretend that she's got problem and ask David for help. The woman pleads for her son to be forgiven, though he has killed his brother. So the woman says, "Oh, King David, I've got two sons. One killed the other. Now the people want me to give up the other son. But if I give up the other son for punishment, then I will lose two sons. I only had two sons. One died. Now I got the other one. If that one also punished, then I got no son." So David grants her request, says, "Okay, I'll make sure that nobody will punish your son." Okay. Then she turns around and she asks, "You forgive my son for killing the other son. Then why didn't you forgive your son Absalom, who killed your other son Amnon?" Right? So the same argument. You can forgive me, or why can't you forgive your own son in the same situation, all right? And then she says something interesting in verse 14. 14, 14, 14, 14, 14, 13. But God does not take away life. Instead, he devises ways so that a banished person may not remain estranged from him. So she says the character of God is not a God who desires punishment, but a God who wants to reconcile. It's a New Testament concept, right? But nicely put in the Old Testament. So although we have sinned, God's first desire is not punishment, but reconciliation. And that's what happens. Jesus comes and dies for us, reconciling us so that we do not have to face punishment. Now, David knows that it is Joab who masterminded this plan. David then sends for Absalom, but commands him to stay in his own house and not to see the king. So David says, okay, kind of forgiven, he can come back, but he is not allowed to see me. So while David longed for Absalom, for the last chapter, the last verse, says that David longed. So while David longed for Absalom, there needed to be some consequences for Absalom's, for Amnon's death, for Absalom's killing Amnon. Okay, so this is kind of a reconciliation, kind of reconciliation. It's not full reconciliation. Okay, so you can come back, but don't see me. Stay in your own house, kind of situation. For 2 years, Absalom does not see his father. He has 3 sons and a daughter named Tamar. And this named Tamar is his sister who was raped. So probably he named the daughter in honor of his sister. Absalom sends Joab to David, requesting permission to see the king. He's frustrated. No, you say I can come back. I come back, but you say I cannot see you. So it's like 6:30. You forgive me or don't forgive me? If I'm guilty, kill me. Why? What kind of forgiveness is halfway? So he states that it is meaningless to return if he's not fully forgiven. And he is even willing to be put to death if really David feels that he is guilty and cannot be forgiven. So after this, David reconciles with his son Absalom. Okay. So when you think about God, God doesn't just say, I forgive you all. You don't need to go to hell, but you all go to stay far away from me. I don't want to see your face or whatever. When God forgives us, he forgives us totally. He forgives our guilt, justification, and then he sanctifies, declares us holy in Jesus Christ. It's full reconciliation. And not only he justifies us and sanctifies us, but when we go to heaven, he will glorify us. He will treat us just like Jesus Christ. So we are not only forgiven our sins, we are become adopted children of God, and we are co-heirs with Jesus Christ, co-heirs with Jesus Christ. Can you imagine that? God forgives us, God adopts us as his children, and then God treats us just like Jesus. That is too mind-boggling. Some of us have problem. Step number 1, forgiving others. Even in our own churches, this person doesn't forgive that person within the family, across relatives or whatever, or within the church. Yeah, not blood, but in every church got this kind of problem. Christians who struggle to forgive. But God not only forgives sinners like us, he adopts us as his children, and then he treats us like Jesus Christ. That is totally amazing. And so scriptures tells us, behold, what manner of love that God has for us. Right? So it's an awesome thing to be called children of God. Sometimes we take all these things for granted. Oh, God treats us as children. What's a big deal and all? You must sit and you think about it. The very fact that God will even forgive you. Why should he forgive you? Amazing that he, such an perfect God can forgive us. Here we are, imperfect people cannot forgive other imperfect people, but a perfect God forgives. And then this perfect God accepts us as his children. Forgive us is enough. Why must make us his children? But from the beginning, from creation, he created us in his image. It was his idea all along that we will be his children, his sons and his daughters. And then it's not just adoption by name, but treats us like the one and only begotten son. He treats us just like Jesus. That is awesome. That is amazing. You need to sit and think about that until you cry. You must know the love of God. Then you will be able to forgive others and accept others. You want to practice your Christian faith. If you want to practice the greatest commandment, to love God and to love your neighbor, you cannot do that until you know how much God loves you. So love God by knowing how much he loves you. Don't try to love God. Just sit and meditate on how much God loves you. And then you will naturally love him. And when you love him, you will also love others. When you know how much you are forgiven, you will also be able to forgive. Christian living is not what you do, it's what God has done and your response to God. So rejoice that God forgives us and receives us fully as his children. No 6:30, and so you come, but you stay in another house. No such thing. Come and stay with me. That's God's call. Okay, so we go to chapter 15. Absalom schemes to steal the hearts of the people. He greets people who come to see David and conspires against David. He receives the people warmly and gains their favor. After 4 years, he goes to Hebron under the pretext of fulfilling a vow to the Lord. So he has come back to David. He has asked David to fully accept him. So now relationship is reconciled. But instead of being thankful, grateful, and so on, this guy is scheming to become the king. Okay. And the way he does is he meets people who are going to see the king, he stops there halfway and says, what's your problem? And tries to settle their problem and so on. And so he gains the people's favor. So this, when I read this, it reminds me of the parable of the shrewd manager. Remember the story of the shrewd manager? The master said, oh, this guy's stealing from me, kick him out. Settle your accounts. And this guy says, okay, everybody who owe the master, come. How much you owe? 900? Okay, make it 400. You? 1,000? Okay, make it 300. So he gains the favor of people. Deceiving the master, he gains the favor, hoping that when he's kicked out, the people will take care of him. So this guy is also shrewd and cunning, and he's working against his own father. So Absalom invites 200 important guests from Jerusalem, okay, including David's counselor. Okay, so he invites all these key people to come to him at Hebron. They attend innocently without knowing about the conspiracy because Absalom intends to become king. So while in Hebron, when all these important people are with him in Hebron, Absalom proclaims himself as king. So he is following the steps of his father. Remember, David was king first in Hebron and then over Israel. So he is doing the same thing his father did, proclaim himself as king in Hebron, and later he wants to be king over all Israel. When David hears of this, he flees with his officials. Now, 10 concubines are left behind to care for the palace. So David brings all his officials and his wives and children and runs away because he knows Absalom will come and there'll be going to be a conflict. But he leaves 10 of his concubines to take care of the palace. Now, despite the betrayal of his son, David finds faithful men who will still serve under him. Okay, so the priests Zadok and Abiathar they are sent. They wanted to follow David, but David says, "Nope, you don't follow me. Go back with the ark, and you remain there, and you send word to me. Basically be my spy lah. Tell me what's happening, and you can do it through your two sons. Your sons are young. Tell them whatever information you have, and your sons will run and give the message to me." And Absalom has a wise counselor in this guy, Ahithophel. Okay, very wise guy that everybody respects, even David. Now, there's another guy, Hushai, who comes to David and wants to follow David. And David says, you follow me, not as good as you go back to Absalom. Pretend to give counsel to Absalom and frustrate Ahithophel's counsel. So give contradictory counsel and bad counsel to Absalom, because Ahithophel's counsel is normally good. And if Absalom follows Ahithophel's counsel, it won't be good for me. So you go and frustrate it. You give a different counsel. So that's the arrangement. So again, sin has consequences. There was trouble in the family, there's death in the family, now there's betrayal in the family. So sin has many, many consequences. Okay, so problem upon problem comes upon David. Why? One sin and many consequences. Now, chapter 16, Ziba, the steward of Mehishaboth, he meets David with donkeys, with food and wine. And he says, all this for you and for your men. When asked where Mehishaboth is, Ziba explains that he is staying in Jerusalem in the hope of gaining back his grandfather's kingdom. Okay, Mehishaboth is Saul's grandson, Jonathan's son. So this Ziba says, oh, the guy is staying in Jerusalem. He's not going to follow you. He's hoping to get back Saul's kingdom. Okay. Now David grants all of Mephibosheth's property to Ziba, because David thinks, I took him, the guy is lame, and I mean, I'm not talking about lame as literally lame, handicapped. So he's saying, I took him and I treated him with respect. He ate at my table and all that. But now he doesn't want to follow me. He's waiting, hoping to get his father's kingdom and so on. So David, probably angry with that guy, says, okay, take over his property. So he's giving Mephibosheth's property to the servant Ziba. As he's traveling, Shimei, a man of Saul's clan, a Benjamite. Saul is Benjamite, this guy also Benjamite. So a man from Saul's clan pelts David and his men, throws stones at them. He curses David for taking over Saul's kingdom. David calms his officials from striking down Shimei. Okay, so David's officials, they say, why is this guy cursing the king? Let me go and kill him. They say, no, don't do that. Now, David accepts that these two may be from the Lord. As I said, whatever bad thing now happens to David, David kind of, God said, I will be punished, there'll be trouble. So whatever happened to me, well, maybe it's from God. How do I know? So he's kind of stuck. No matter what bad thing happened, maybe it's from God. So I cannot retaliate. That's his situation. So Shimei follows David, cursing and throwing stones at him and showering him with dirt. So David is willing to accept calamities from the Lord. He knows he has sinned, and so he's got all these trouble and problems. Question is, do we accept calamities from the Lord? Remember, David is a man after God's own heart. David is one chosen by God, specifically chosen by God, one who receives God's blessings and promises. And yet, David knows he is a sinner and that all the problem that comes, he's willing to accept. This is like Job. Job was a righteous man, and because of the challenge of Satan, God allowed troubles to come to Job. And Job's wife says, curse God and die lah. And what did Job tell his wife? Shall we accept good from the Lord and not evil. Evil in that case is not moral evil, problems and troubles. Okay, so Job, he's a righteous man, but he says, well, I accept good things from God. Well, I'm a sinner. I'm not perfect righteous. I'm also willing to accept bad things. So one of the things that we as Christians must learn to accept is this is a fallen world. There will be troubles in our life. If you cannot accept that, you're going to have lots of problems in your life when problems come. That's why prosperity gospel is terrible. Because if the pastor keeps saying, now that you're a Christian, no problem, no trouble, everything will be sweet, 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 that's not life. That's not this world. And so when problem come, you will start doubting God. I thought pastor said, now I'm Christian, everything must be blessed. How come then God is not trustworthy? And so you start blaming God. Accept that this world is a sinful world, that there will be problems, and there won't be just one problem after problem. I was talking to someone today. I was telling him, everybody has got problem. You must learn to accept problem if you want to be strong. So I have kidney cancer and my kidney removed. Do you think this is my last problem? I won't have any more problem? No, there will be problems later due to aging, because I got family, I got 3 kids. Some problem become their problem, become my problem, kind of thing. There will be problems, okay? Marital problem, church, ministry problem, all kinds of problems going to come down the line. If I cannot accept the fact that there will be problems, I will not find happiness in life. Jesus told us, you will have trouble in this life, but be of good cheer. I have overcome. So be a Christian, accept that there will be trouble. Don't wait for trouble. Don't expect, oh, I'm going to get whacked by God every time. I'm not asking you to think like that. I always think God is a God of blessing, and I think my life will be blessed. And I think truly my life is blessed in many, many ways. But that doesn't mean there are no situations, no moments, no periods of trouble. There will be trouble. And because trouble, I expect trouble. When trouble comes, it doesn't trouble me. Okay? If you're willing to accept that there will be trouble, when trouble comes, it will not trouble you. Okay. Back in Jerusalem, Hushai enters into Absalom's council. Now he's one of the counselors for Absalom. Ahithophel advises Absalom to lie with David's concubines, to have sex with David's concubines. Remember, David left 10 concubines to look after the palace. So Ahithophel says, well, David and Absalom, father and son, you all fight today. Tomorrow, you all may be reconciled, right? So your men will not fight against David because they say this is father-son quarrel. Tomorrow they may reconcile. So if we act against David, tomorrow David may not so good, right? So Ahithophel tells Absalom, you must indicate, you must show your men that you're truly against your father. You must break ties. You must really say, I and David, we are enemies, like that. So, and the best way to do this is go and sleep with David's concubines. And then everybody will know that you are truly against David. And then your people will fight against David. Okay, so this is Ahithophel's advice to Absalom. Now, a tent is pitched on the roof of the palace, and Absalom lies with David's concubines, as foretold by the prophet Nathan. What did Nathan say? You lie with Bathsheba in a secret way, but I will get someone close to you to lie with your wives in the open. And so that prophecy comes to pass. Okay. Again, it's a prophecy. It is not God predestining. This is the counsel of Ahithophel. God is not giving this counsel to do evil and all, but God allows it. Okay, remember, not predestined, but allows it. Okay. what is the reasoning behind Ahithophel's advice? Basically, that David, and it shows that David and his son are separated. Now, the interesting thing is this: Amnon slept with his stepsister, right? So when Amnon slept with his stepsister Tamar, her brother Absalom was angry. How can you do this, incest? But today, Absalom is sleeping with his own stepmothers, not stepsister, but stepmothers. Not one of them, but 10 of them. So Absalom kind of taking revenge on Amnon. Was it really righteous? Is he really a righteous man, caring about what is good and right and all that? Fear of God? It shows that he doesn't have the fear of God because he's doing things that God says you cannot do. Cannot sleep with your mothers, right? And he's not righteous because this is also incest, mother and son. So if you say Amnon did a shameful thing, then Absalom has done nothing less. It's even more shameful. So sin has consequences. There's trouble in the family, there's death in the family, there's betrayal in the family, and now total shame in the family. Chapter 17. Ahithophel gives advice to Absalom concerning David. He says, send 12,000 men and let them attack David. Because David is now running away, he's weak, he's weary. So while he's running away, while he's tired, he's not organized, send 12,000 men to attack David. And he tells Absalom, we are not going to fight a war with David's soldiers. We just want to kill only David. And then receive the other men to come back and to serve. So his target is only David. We are not going to go for a war with David and his all his soldiers. Just kill David, and the rest of the men will follow you. That's the advice of his general. And Absalom asked Hushai, what does he think about Ahithophel's advice? Hushai states that the plan is bad. Why is it bad? Because David and his men are mighty warriors, and any loss now will weaken Absalom's position. Absalom, you just came back from Hebron, you've taken over the palace in Jerusalem. Now you just new king. If you go and fight with David, David's men are all rugged, they are all mighty warriors, very experienced in warfare. You go and fight with them, you lose, huh? So he says, no, don't fight now. Go and gather all the soldiers in Israel, call all the soldiers, bigger force, and then we go and attack David. So Hushai says this, okay? And so Absalom and all the leaders, the elders of Israel, they consider the two advice and say Hushai's advice is wiser, is better, okay? So they accept his advice, but why did they accept? The Bible says because God wanted to frustrate Ahithophel's good advice. The advice that Ahithophel gives is good advice, strategically good. For Absalom to sleep with his stepmothers, that is strategically a good advice. Morally bad advice, okay? Morally bad, but strategically good. The advice to fight, to send men to kill David while he's weak and weary is strategically good advice. So indeed, Ahithophel, he's really a wise counselor, strategically speaking, okay, very wise counselor. But unfortunately, his advice is not taken. And then Hushai sends word to David to cross the Jordan. So he will tell the two priests who will tell their sons, and the sons will run and tell David to cross the Jordan before the soldiers come and so on. So Ahithophel, he is disappointed that his advice was not taken. So disappointed that he hangs himself. Okay, so in the Bible it says the advice of Ahithophel is like that of gods. Okay, so people respected this general's advice, this counselor's advice. But maybe this is the first time his advice is not heeded. He's so disappointed, he hangs himself. Okay. Meanwhile, Absalom crosses the Jordan in pursuit of David. So now he's got the bigger army, he pursues David. Amasa, Joab's cousin, is made the army commander, Absalom's army commander. Okay, so they are all kind of all related. They are fighting each other. Remember, they're all actually all related to one another. In fact, the region, the Moabites, the Ammonites, they're all children of or related to the children of Israel. Now, crossing the Jordan, David and his people are provided food and bedding, and David remains popular among the people. Even though he's in exile, he's very popular. Why is he popular? I thought Absalom is now the king. So why is David so popular? Anyone? David is not perfect. He's committed adultery and murder. So, but why is David so popular? He's an old king. And Absalom is David's son. And remember, he also gained the favor of the people. So I think because David led with love, not power. Remember, David became king, and he wanted to be a king for the sake of the people. Right? He didn't want to be king just for himself. He understands that God has called me to be king for the sake. Last week we were talking about this. He understood that God had called him to be king for the sake of the people. Okay, so a democracy for the people, by the people, those kind of stuff. Okay, so democracy is good. Dictatorship generally we say is bad, but not always. If the dictator is good, if the dictator loves the people, for the people, he does everything for their good and all, dictatorship can work. In India, there's one dictator called Asoka. Okay, initially he murdered the people and all that, but later he turned to Buddhism, and then no killing and all that. Then he became a good king lah. Okay, so sometimes dictators can be good kings or rulers if they are for the people. Okay, so doesn't mean democracy is always good. Sometimes democracy, you got two parties and they always sabo one another, like what's happening in US now. Republican Democrats, they always sabo each other and all that. And who suffer? The people suffer. So democracy does not always work, and dictatorship is not always bad. It all depends on the people, whether the people, the rulers are good or bad, whether they are for the people and so on. Okay. So in our own lives, as parents, we are leaders, don't try to control your children with power and authority. Follow me because I'm your father. That will work when they are in nursery or primary school, but it won't work once they finish their secondary school. So whatever your position and your working place or whatever, whether it's church or outside, try to rule with love. Be there at the top for the sake of the people. Do good for the people, not for yourself. Don't use people for your gains and to improve and to move your own what do you call that? Your own kingdom lah. Don't establish your kingdom. Help people, bless people. And even if you step down from leadership, people will still respect you. So you can be a manager or CEO or whatever of whatever company. The moment you step down, people look at you on the street, whether they come to you, hey, hi, or they don't, will speak volumes about how you treated them. Right? If you really cared for the people out, they will come to you and thank you for your work. So even when you grow old, you're weak, people will still love you, respect you. So the best way to lead is with love. And probably that is the reason why God is love. God could be anything. He could be sovereign, he could be almighty, he could be whatever. But God, the way he deals with us is with love. And he calls us also to love God, to love others, because that's the best way to relate with people. Okay. Wow, chapter 18 managed to make it. So David organizes his troops So Absalom is coming to fight. So David organizes his troops and sends them out to battle with Absalom's group. He requests that they be gentle with Absalom. Says, be gentle with the young man, because he's my son. Be careful. So in the battle, Israel is defeated. Okay, Israel is defeated by David's people. And they are fighting in a forest. And it says, and the forest swallowed up more men that day than the sword. So they were fighting with swords and all that, but more people were defeated by the forest, meaning they are running to the forest and they got lost, or there's maybe quicksand or whatever. So many more people were lost because of the forest than by the sword. And in many cases, when Israel fights our enemies, God sends an angel, or God sends some earthquake or whatever, and causes death, or he confuses the other enemies, and they fight against each other now. So very often more people are killed because of God's act than the act of Israelites. And so even in our own life, while we fight enemies and we do this and that, don't fight alone. Let the battle belong to God. Obey God and bring God into your battles in life. Don't fight alone. Okay. So for me in QLC, yeah, I want to do this, I want to do that. But I have to ask myself, is it I want to do, or is this what God wants to do? Is God trying to help me, or am I trying to help God? Who's helping who, and whose will is being done? So leadership and all, we must consider carefully and do God's will in God's way. Now, Absalom, he's got very groovy hair, and he says that he cuts his hair only once a year, and the weight of it is 2.3 kilogram. Chapter 14, verse 26. So his hair is his glory, like Samson's hair. His hair is his glory. One of the things that really he's said to be very handsome and all. One of the defining thing, one of the things that he's proud about is his hair. He's got lots of hair, okay, heavy hair. But the thing that he's proud of is the thing that brought him down. Absalom's hair is caught in a large oak tree as he flees. He's in a forest, he's dense, he's running. Unfortunately, his hair gets caught up in all the branches and so on, and he gets stuck down there. He cannot run. And somebody points out to Joab that Absalom is there. And Joab tells him, why did you kill him? And the soldier says, no thanks. Even if you give me a lot of money, I'm not going to do that. Because David says, be gentle with my son. And if I go and kill him, then you are not going to come and support me. No thanks. And Joab says, well, I'm not going to be so patient as you. So he takes some javelins, he goes and he kills Absalom. And then his soldiers also join him and they kill. And after they've killed Absalom, they throw his body in a big pit in the forest, and they pile up a large heap of stones over him. Now, previously, Absalom had erected a pillar in the King's Valley as a monument to himself, for he thought, I have no son to carry on the memory of my name. So this is before this fight, okay? In chapter, it says previously, how long ago, don't know lah, some time ago. Absalom erected a pillar as a monument to himself. And now he dies, and a pile of rocks, which is basically a pillar, is he erected a pillar, now he's dying in a pillar. So it's irony. So he says the reason for raising up that pillar is, he says, I have no son to carry on the memory of my name. So that is actually quite strange, because chapter 14 verse 23 states that he had 3 sons and a daughter. Remember Tamar? The daughter's name is Tamar. So I guess this statement is before he had the sons. Okay, he erected the pillars before he had his sons, and then later he had sons. David receives the news that Absalom is dead and is heartbroken. He mourns, wishing himself dead instead of Absalom. So why does he wish himself dead instead of Absalom? Perhaps David knew deep down in his heart that all these things are the outcome of his sin against Uriah, murdering him and committing adultery with Uriah's wife. And so he feels guilty about it. So no matter what happens in his life, whether people curse him or his son is raping the sister, or the other son betrays him, or whoever, all the trouble in his life, David has to take it like, ultimately it all goes back to his sin. Okay, so the consequences of David's sin is multifaceted, a lot of different trouble. So sin has consequences again, and this time is destroying the family. Okay, one son has died, now this son is dead. The daughter, for all practical purpose, she's dead. She's her life is ruined and so on. And so if you look at this chart, Tamar was raped. Before that, David's life is quite okay lah. Then he commits adultery. Once he commits adultery, all the troubles start. Tamar is raped. And for 2 years, Amnon was not killed. He was left alone. But after 2 years, he's killed. And then following that, Absalom self-exiled. He goes to his maternal grandfather, stays there for 3 years. After 3 years, he comes back to David, but he's not allowed to see David's face. So he stays separately. And then finally, after 2 years, David says, okay, everything's reconciled. And then 4 years of conspiracy. Okay. And sometime later, Absalom is killed. So David's sin brought him at least 11 plus years of troubles. All that years of trouble because of sin and its consequences. So unfortunately, sin is not something you do, you can get away with it. There are consequences, and sometimes the consequences are not so great. And sometimes the consequences, you can make restitution, you can apologize or whatever. But some sins can just have effects for many years. And also, if you're someone of power and authority, pastors, rulers, councilmen, whatever, the more higher up, the more careful we must be. Okay, responsibilities and privilege go hand in hand. Okay, I think we better stop here. 9:15. Any questions or any thoughts from your own studies, what God has revealed to you?
Pastor Andrew, this is Grace.
Yes, Grace.
Can I just ask, I don't understand, why is it that David's general Joab is always going against David's command?
Interesting guy, because when David was longing for his son Absalom has run away to his maternal grandfather. David longs for his son Absalom, and Joab, he realizes that David is mourning and longing, and he actually gets a lady to do the act and reconciles David to Absalom, right? So he, in a sense, he's not always against David. He's fighting David's battle. He's risking his life to fight for David. And when Uriah is sent to him, he obeys David and sends Uriah. I don't know whether he feels, hey, this is not right thing to do, but well, my king, my Lord tells me to do, so he does it. So in many ways, he is obedient to David, and he's subservient to David and so on, and even understands David's longing, and fulfills David's longing by bringing back his son. So in one aspect, he is kind of a good friend to David. But you are right. There are other times when he is going against David and so on. So it's a very interesting relationship that he has with David. Yeah. So in the case of Absalom, when David says to be gentle with the young man for my sake, why does Joab kill Absalom? One reason could be, you put yourself in Joab's shoe. Oh, the king is so sad because his son is separated. Then he has to think how to reconcile. I cannot just go and tell the king will be angry. So I play a drama, get a woman, and then reconcile. Or I take all the effort to reconcile them and so on. So now come back, but then cannot see the king. And then the son, Absalom, scolds Joab, okay, because he asked Joab to come because he wanted to send the father to fully reconcile. And Joab was quite late, and then Absalom burns his fields and all these things. So I am so good to you. I reconciling you to your father. You are doing all this nonsense to me and so on. And then finally, this is David. He's my master. He's my leader. I'm devoted to him. Finally, you go against him and you're trying to take over the king. So from Joab's point of view, you're not grateful to me. I'm trying to reconcile you and all that. And you do bad to me. And now you're doing bad to my king. So anyone who's enemy to my king is my king. Maybe he thinks like that. Personal grudge because he's not respected, all his efforts not respected. And also strategically, if you are the enemy of my king, maybe he's a tough disciplinary guy. He's not the forgiving type. Remember when Abner, the former commander of Ishbosheth, came to see David, and then Joab is told, oh, the Abner came. Then he says, how come you let him come and go away in peace? And then he plots and asks Abner to come back, and he kills him, right? So for this Joab, he kind of doesn't forgive people. If your enemy means forever, and probably he's got this attitude lah. So once you're enemy to David, whether you're Abner or you are Absalom, I don't care. I'll kill you. There's no forgiveness. Probably he's like that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Any other thoughts? At the end of the day, it's not about David and David's story. You must ask, how does this apply to my life? Okay, so do I treat sin lightly? Do I appreciate God's forgiving me, accepting me as his child, treating me like Christ? So at the end, you must also make all this apply to your life. And if you, I'm talking to all of you, if you are playing with sin, if you are flirting with somebody, you better watch this and say, flirting and having sex is in either premarital or adultery. Yeah, it's fun, it's good and all that, but consequences. So don't give in to temptations. And if you've already done sin, whether it's premarital sex or adultery, whatever, know that God is a forgiving God. He won't forgive you halfway. He will fully forgive you. So do not sin, but if you sin, there's a forgiving God. But don't play with God. Don't say, I will sin and later I'll ask for forgiveness. Don't try to make God a fool. You will become the fool. Okay. So there are very many practical things that we can learn as we study the life of people in the Bible.